Hello friends, welcome to this lecture number 14 on the course on consumer psychology. Up till now what we have done is we have looked at a complete section 1 of this course where we dealt with what is consumer behavior and we looked at the decision making process of consumers. That was section 1 to 9. From section 9 onwards commence the second part of this course where we are looking at individual psychological factors related to the consumers and how these psychological factors modulate the behavior of consumers into the marketplace and also affects marketer action into the marketplace. So, in this pattern we started off by explaining perception and we explained both stimuli features, which is product features and consumer features, and how these product features and consumer features or product parameters and consumer parameters affect consumer perception, affect how consumer makes decision into the marketplace. So, we looked at stimuli features, for example color, we looked at stimuli features like taste, like feel, like smell and those kind of features, and how these features actually drive the consumer to take action into the marketplace. We also looked at individual features, person related features like thresholds, the idea of Lyman or threshold, the idea of Weber's law, the idea of stimulus discrimination and stimulus generalization, and how these processes make a consumer make a decision into the marketplace. We also looked at how these perceptual factors of how a stimulus is encoded and a meaning is generated out of it, that affects the marketer, that influences the marketer action into the marketplace. Further to it, we looked at other cognitive processes at higher level perception, for example things like organization, things like categorization, and how these processes shape the consumer behavior into the marketplace. Further to it, we looked at price perceptions, quality service perceptions and other social perceptions which also play a important role into the decision making process of the consumer, or which plays an important role in the behavior of the consumer and the marketer into the marketplace. The last two lectures we looked at two important factors. One was memory and the other was learning. And so, memory and learning are very essential for consumer behavior. Why? Memory is that process which stores information received by the consumers into the marketplace. And so, how this information which is in the marketplace about products, about brands, about brand benefits, about need arousals, about so many other things related to the idea of consumer perception, consumer decision making, how they are processed, categorized and stored into memory is important. Each step is important both for the consumer as well as the marketer. For the consumer it is important because these processes will guide what he remembers from the marketplace, what information he remembers and how he remembers it. And so, if he wants to remember a product, what should he do? What kind of processes should he do? It is important to the marketer in the way that the marketers, if they understand what is the consumer doing with the information given to them, they will have a better scope of presenting the information into the marketplace. So, we looked at all the three processes, right from how is information stored to how is information grabbed to how is information retrieved. And so, on all the three sections of memory, we looked at how or what processes accompany this memory or accompany this storing of information from the marketplace. Last lecture we looked at learning. So, certain theories of learning and how these learning theories help the consumer learn about products or develop beliefs about products and product benefits. So, we looked at two kind of learning theories, the non-associative, we looked at habitual purchasing, and so in those we looked at the probability theory of learning. So, it is like doing an action because there is a habit of doing an action, and the associative theory of learning, where we looked at how classical conditioning and instrumental conditioning, these two processes help the consumer in learning about products, in acquiring information about products and storing them in memory. With classical conditioning, we also discussed instrumental conditioning, and we differentiated what is the difference between them and which is a better form of conditioning. We also looked at modeling as a learning theory, and how modeling, or sometimes it is called observation learning, how these affects consumer behavior, or the idea of learning through observation, how does that affect consumer behavior. Further to that, we looked at cognitive theory, which was the last theory that we looked at, where what we focused on is not learning by doing, but learning by thinking about how you do a particular thing, or how a particular product is processed by you. That helps. So, this is what we did up till now. Now, today we are going to see another interesting psychological variable which affects consumer behavior into the market, and this variable is very important. And the variable of interest for today's study is motivation, emotion and mood. And so, what we will do is we will divide this lecture into two parts. We look at motivation and part of emotion into the first part, and emotion continuing, mood and involvement into the second part, and we look at how the psychological processes actually help the consumer make decisions into the marketplace, or drive people, or modulate the decision of consumer into the marketplace. And that is very important, because these features have a major role to play in consumer behavior. So, let us start our lecture, and since we are describing about motivation, emotion and mood, let us start first by looking at what is motivation. So, let us start with a preliminary idea of what motivation is, or some idea of what motivation is, what is features, and then we will see motivation in the context of consumer behavior. So, what is motivation then? Motivation is defined. So, what is motivation? It is an internal state that initiates certain activities leading to goal directed behavior. Let us try and understand what does it say here. So, it is an internal state first of all. So, what is motivation? It is an internal state. So, basically what happens here is that motivation is internal in nature. So, this definition, by this definition, motivation is something which is internal in nature, it is not external to people. And what does it do? Motivation, it creates or it makes possible certain activities, it initiates certain activities. What kind of activities? Those activities which lead to a goal directed behavior. Right? You are hungry, you want food, and so all those acts that you do to attain the food are activities which are initiated by the motivation of hunger. Right? So, goal directed behavior is getting the food. All those activities, searching for places to get the food, searching for food types, searching for money to be spent, and all those decisions that you take towards the food is what are the activities, and motivation is that state, that difference between actual and real state that makes you look for food. So, that is what is motivation. So, let us quickly look at this nature of motivation. So, what do we understand from that? From this definition, first of all, motivation is an internal state, and so mostly it is imaginary in nature. Nobody has seen motivation, it is imaginary, it is hypothetical, but the effects of motivation is seen. So, it is a covert state, it is a covert act, a hidden act which cannot be seen on its own, but its actions, but its influences can be seen in terms of behavior of people. Leads to certain activities. So, motivation generally initiates certain activities. When you are motivated, you will not just stay, you will not be sitting idle. Motivation initiates activities, certain kind of behavior is initiated, certain kind of acts are initiated, certain kind of paradigm, some function or some kind of movements are initiated, and so that is what motivation does. Motivation initiates activities. And what do these activities do? These activities, this initiates goal directed behavior. So, through motivation certain activities are initiated, certain distress is initiated, certain physiological changes are initiated, and these physiological changes make you do certain behavior, and this behavior leads to attaining a goal, to acquiring a goal, and this leads to activation of goal directed behavior. The fourth thing, once set or once initiated, the motivated behavior will extinguish only once the goal is reached. So, interesting thing, once a motivated behavior is started, most general cases, there are times where with task complexity motivation goes down, but generally speaking once motivation is activated, once motivated behavior is activated, it will only end, it will only finish once you attain the goal. So, whatever goal you are looking at, and once you attain the goal, only then motivated behavior is going to finish or it is going to stop. And so, this is what the definition of motivation is. So, what do we learn? Motivation is an internal state, first of all it is an internal physiological change in the body which makes you do certain activities. These activities leads to certain behaviors, certain behavioral patterns, certain actions, and these actions lead to you achieving a goal. So, it is a driving force, motivation is a driving force, just like the force that we study in physics, in Newton's law, those forces which make a body move. Similarly, motivation is an internal force which makes a body move, and not only move, but attain a goal. So, if in physics making a body move is to demonstrate distance covered or speed or velocity, in psychology this action leads to achieving certain goals, leads to achievement of goals, and that is what motivation is all about. And so, generally speaking there are two types of motivation. One is called the primary motivation and the second is called the secondary form of motivation. So, what is primary motivation? Those motivations which are very basic to our living is called primary motivation, and so these are food, this is sleep, this is thirst and sex. Basic motivation without which humans cannot move forward. We will discuss this in when we discussed the idea of primary and secondary motivation, when we discuss Maslow's hierarchical theory. And then there are secondary motivations that is to be considered, and these secondary motivations is some like need for achievement. So, you want to achieve something, the need to express yourself, the need to achieve certain goals, the need to prove yourself is one motivation. The need for affiliation, the need for power. So, affiliation is that motivation which makes people talk to other people, be social, that is need for affiliation. And need for power, that need which makes you control other people, that need which makes you express yourself, that particular need is need for power. And so, there are at least 7 or 8 needs which McClelland has explained in terms of the TAT, which is the thematic perception test, which is generally used for measuring these motivations. So, this is a little bit about the psychology of motivation. So, let us switch back to applying this theory of motivation, applying this idea of motivation into the consumer prospect, into the consumer behavior prospect. So, what is consumer motivation? The definition says consumer motivation is one of the driving forces of consumer behavior. So, why do consumers behave? Why do consumers do certain acts in the marketplace? Why do consumers do anything at all? The reason why consumers do anything, the reason why consumer buy products, the reason why consumer demonstrates himself by experiencing certain services is motivation. So, motivation drives them to do acts, to make decisions, to make acts into the marketplace, to do something into the marketplace, change themselves from the actual state to the desired state, and that is what is motivation. Now, the key objective of marketing communication is to motivate consumers to prefer and purchase. And so, what is the need for these marketing communications? These marketing communications are also called advertisements. So, what is the need for these advertisements? The need for these advertisements is to make people get motivated towards preferring and buying, towards doing comparison among brands into the marketplace and buying the one which satisfies their need. That is the reason why these marketing communications are there. And so, the one key role of marketing communication is to motivate consumers. We will look at this particular aspect of marketing communication in lecture number 18 and 19, and there I will explain you more. So, closely tied to the concept of motivation is affective states, which are emotions, moods and feelings. And so, with motivation, once you are motivated to do something, closely related to this feeling of motivation, this internal relation or internal drive or internal feeling of motivation is the concept of affective states, emotions and moods. So, once you are motivated, once you want to do something, you either like it or you do not like it, and this likeness or do not likeness is what are affective states, and they can be expressed as emotions, expressed as moods and expressed as feelings. And so, that is what we are going to see in the next part of the lecture, in the second part of this lecture, of how motivation and emotions combine together to drive the behavior of consumer into the marketplace. So, consumer motivation is the drive to satisfy needs and wants through purchase and use of products. And if we look into this definition, what does this definition say is that this consumer motivation is the reason, is the drive, is the force which makes or which leads to satisfaction of needs and wants. So, these need satisfaction, as you know, the first step in consumer behavior is to understanding needs, and that is what we did when we looked at consumer decision making. So, a need has to be there. Consumer should want something. If the consumer does not want anything, if there is no difference between his actual and desired state, the consumer will not act. So, a need has to be aroused. And so, motivation is that force which basically makes a consumer satisfy his needs and wants, and these needs and wants could be both physiological in nature and psychological in nature. A physiological need could be hunger, so buying some food, and a psychological need would be buying jewelry, which gives you that status, which gives you that esteem, upliftment in the society. So, it could be both psychological and physiological in nature, and through purchase. And how do they do this? How do they satisfy this need? By making purchases and use of products and services. So, to satisfy these needs, consumers go into the marketplace and purchase and buy. What? They buy products which can satisfy their need, or they buy services which can satisfy their needs. So, product buying is going into the marketplace and buying a diamond ring is a product buying. Going into the marketplace and subscribing for cable TV is service purchase. So, it can be both purchase for products as well as purchase for services. Now, we have discussed this before in the starting lecture itself. Motives are both simple in nature. So, simple motive is food. Those motives, those drives which make you sustain in this world, sustain as a human being, are called primary motives, and these are motives for food, motives for water, motives for need. So, drink, food, thirst, need, all those, sleep, sex, all those things which make you be a human, which make you attain this humanness or live your life in a simple way, are called primary motives. And in addition to this, we have complex motives which are achievement, status, power. So, these motives, achievement is when you want to show yourself, when you want to prove yourself, and it is achievement, acquiring something, getting something, becoming a professor, becoming a doctor, this motive is achievement. Power, becoming the general manager of a company where you have the power of everything, becoming a student leader where you have the power to control people, right. So, those kind of needs, those kind of motives are called complex motivations. So, motivations are both simple and complex in nature, and need satisfaction through consumer motivation has 5 stages. So, how does this need satisfaction actually take place through consumer motivation? There is a cycle, and we will describe this cycle, we will discuss this cycle. So, motivation related need satisfaction, motivation driven need satisfaction has 5 stages into it. It starts with the arising of a need, to the arising of a drive, to satisfying a want, to attaining the goal of the want, and the behavior to actually doing the want. 5 stages, we will discuss this in the next slide. So, need satisfaction through motivation is driven by this first stage. The first step in this process is understanding the need. Let us take an example and try and understanding it. Let us say you are hungry, you have a need, and the need is hunger. You want food, you are hungry, and that is the need. So, what do? A need regulation has to be done. You have to regulate this need. You are hungry and you have to become less hungry. So, what do? A drive sets in. A drive is that internal state that moves you towards lessening this need or lowering this need to the process of eating, to the process of, so lowering this hunger to the process of eating. So, this drive is a process which makes you do that, realize that I need to lower, or I want to lower, or I should lower this need. This leads to drive regulation in terms of want, and so this need, then hunger drives you to wanting food. So, you are hungry, this has to be lowered down. So, there is a motivation, there is a drive, there is a force which makes you want food, because you know that how is this hunger going to go down? Through food. And so, want is the process when you realize that food is going to, want is the process which makes this idea, or which perpetuates this idea, moves this idea forward, that by eating food this need will be satisfied, and the drive is the process which makes you move forward, and so in our case it is the motivation. So, this drive regulation is in terms of want. This wants leads to manifestations of desires, and so manifestation of desire is I want to have food. What kind of food? I want to have Chinese food, I want to have pizza, I want to have something else, that kind of a thing, and that is the realization of the goal. I want food, I want a pizza, right. So, start with a need where you realize that you are hungry, and so you want food. That leads to the drive, the force which makes you do something about it, so that this hunger is lowered down, and that leads to the want of food. So, want is where the food comes in, this drive is the motivation. This leads to the goal. The goal is the specific type of food that you want to eat, be it a pizza, be it a Chinese food, be it Italian food, be it French food, Indian, anything, some food. And this goal then leads to goal attainment. How? Through the behavior. So, you do something, you want pizza, what do? Call up a pizza company, look at leaflets of pizza which offer discounts, coupons work somewhere. All the companies look at TV ads, look at newspaper ads, think about from memory about all those pizza companies, and then call up one of them and set the idea that you want pizza, right. And so, through this behavior you attain the pizza, you eat the pizza that you have acquired, and through that there is a reduction of tension. Once you eat the pizza, you are no more hungry, and so you reach to the initial state when needs are adjusted. So, most of the times the need is adjusted, it is not changed. And so, once a change in need happens, a drive sets in for you to do something about it, do a behavior which actually leads you to lowering or making this need come to baseline, right. So, bringing it from where you were, right, at the state where there is no need arousal, there is no differences happening. So, there are certain behavioral models of this need, and we will take in 3 different models and try and explain how these behavioral models of motivation or these behavioral models explain motivation in terms of the consumer context. So, the first model that we are going to look at is called the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It is a very interesting model given by Abraham Maslow in the early part of the 19th century, and it is a very powerful model. Not only this model is used in social psychology, but this model is also used in consumer studies, this model is used in motivational studies, and it is also used in marketing studies and all kind of studies. It is a very powerful, very basic model of consumer motivation. It describes how consumer motivation progresses, or what is the way in which consumer motivation progresses. So, what is the essence of this model? It says that personal growth through the identification and satisfaction of a hierarchy of needs, and the key word here is that people achieve personal growth or self actualization by moving through a hierarchy of needs. There are needs that people have, and these needs, either when partially satisfied or fully satisfied, it makes you move from one need to the other need till the point of time you acquire the highest need of all, which is the need for beauty, the need for self actualization, where you express yourself, and this also shows how you move from basic needs to more complex needs. How does this movement really happen, right? And so, within this process it explains how people grow through this process of moving from one need to the other, to the other, to the other. So, basically your life, anybody's life, can be explained through this Maslow's hierarchy of need. From the basic or the food and shelter needs to sophisticated and physiological or psychological desires. So, basically how you move from physiological desires to psychological desires, and what makes you move from one need to the other, that is what Maslow explains. How do people who want food, how do they move from wanting food to appreciating beauty, or working towards world peace, or acquiring their maximum, showing their best potential? How does that happen? So, let us look into this model, how does this model really works. And so, this is the Maslow's motivational model, and as you see, this is the growth need and this is the deficiency need. So, these are the first ones are the physiological needs, lower order needs, this is middle order needs, and these are the higher order needs. So, how do people move from one to the other is what we are looking at. What Maslow says is, to start with, initially people are stuck with physiological needs. To start with, at any person's life, he is stuck with the first need that he wants to get over with is the physiological need. Getting food, getting water, getting sleep, that is the physiological need. So, first of all, people satisfy this need. If you are hungry, you cannot think of making friends, you cannot think of appreciating beauty, you cannot think of inviting people to your home, decorating your home, because you do not have a home. So, the first step is acquiring food. A good way to understand this is looking at beggars. Now, if you look into them, they do not have shelter, they do not have friends, they do not have that kind of a thing, and so the most important thing in their life is food and water that they have today. So, how do I acquire food and water today? That is important, the first step, the first need. The second need is safety needs. So, once I have food and water for today, how do I acquire? So, people move from this need, and that is why you see this is the highest. This is the pyramid, and this pyramid, the base, the highest area is covered by physiological needs. Most people are stuck at this need. But once you move from this need, once you have food and water for today, you move into the second part of it, which is called the safety need. So, once you have water and food for today, you look for water and food for tomorrow, maybe for the month, maybe for the year, maybe for something else. You look for shelter, you look for a place, safe place to live. So, safety. Once you have basic physiology satisfied, you look for safety needs. But what will happen tomorrow? How I can be safe? How I can progress further, that kind of a thing. And so, once this satisfied, the safety needs are satisfied, once you have food and water, and once you have a shelter and safety for tomorrow, people engage into something called belonging and love needs. And so, once you have food now, you have food for tomorrow, you know that for the past upcoming month you have food, you need not worry about it. People think about belongingness need and love needs. So, now people want to talk to other people, make friends with other people, love, have this feeling of joy, that kind of a thing. Before that, the social interactions were not there. And further on is the esteem needs. When people have other people, people meet with other people, they have this food for today, for tomorrow, have a safety, have friends, they have this self-esteem to show that I have esteem, to show that I have this self-image. The concept of self develops, the concept idea about who you are develops, questions about that, expressing yourself, showing your self esteem, those needs develop. And from then comes in the cognitive needs, the needs to think, the needs to reason, the needs to make decisions, that kind of needs comes in. And once you have into these needs, you move further towards aesthetic needs. And as you move from this, the base of the pyramid towards the topmost, people acquire something called personal growth. So, once you move from here to here, personal growth, as you are here, there is no growth, there is no personality, there is no self concept, there is no self esteem, there is no the idea of who you are, that kind of a thing. But as you move along this pyramid, this idea of self, this idea of growth, this idea of oneness with yourself, and that kind of thing moves in. And so, once you have this cognitive need, comes the idea of aesthetic needs, where you start appreciating beauty, you look for things which gives you power, appreciate the environment, appreciate things which are beautiful, which are expressive, which are emotional, which are aesthetic, and so on and so forth. And from there you move to the self actualization need. This is the need when you do not want anything from the world, you have acquired everything, you have everything, and you want to express yourself to attain the best of what you are, to attain who you are, to show who you are to the world, to attain things to the best of your capacity, and that is called the self actualization need. And further on there is something called the transcendence. This is where you make yourself one with the God, you think about higher powers, you think about spirituality, that kind of a thing, you become free of the world and you attain this need. And so, very few people actually move through this progress, and as you know that most people are stuck with the deficiency need. So, this is how need is explained by Maslow. There is another model which is more focused onto the consumer psychology, is Ernest Dichter's model of consumption motives. So, what is Dichter's major consumption motives, or Dichter's model of consumer motives? So, how did it all start? Dichter was actually working for a company called Procter and Gamble, and his study with Procter and Gamble lead to the understanding of these basic consumption motives. Why do people consume things? Because of certain motives, and so this identification of these consumption motives, they were developed through his study with Procter and Gamble. What was the study? The study was on finding motivations behind purchase of ivory soap. Why do people purchase ivory soap? That was what Procter and Gamble was, a company which was manufacturing this ivory soap, and so they put it into the market. And what Procter and Gamble wanted to know is, why are people buying it? So, they hired Ernest Dichter, who was actually a psychologist, to find out why people are motivated, what is the reason for the motivation, what is the main drive behind buying this product, and what did he find? He concluded that bathing soap as a cleansing ritual has a symbolic appeal signifying purification from stains. He believed that people buy this ivory soap because they want to cleanse themselves from stains, from worldly displeasures. They want to move away from all wrongs that they had done, and this idea of washing themselves is actually a process of cleansing. It is a cleansing ritual, and the soap represents a method of cleansing their souls. That is what they remember, and so that is what he said, and so he found out that that is the reason why people are actually buying products or ivory soap. Now, he proposed, from his study, he proposed 12 key motives on consumption. So, he gave a list of 12 key motivations which are there, and how these key motivations reflect different behavioral patterns. So, this is the consumption motive, and this is an example, and so 12 of it. There is the first motive that he explained is power, which is masculinity and virility, and this is expressed, somebody express power. What is the behavior that he is going to do? What are the examples of showing this power motivation? Through buying power tools, hot rods, coffee, red meat, heavy shoes, razors. All these products demonstrate the satisfaction of this masculinity need, power need. For security, ice creams, home baking, hospital care are those examples which demonstrate security consumption motive. The eroticism consumption motive is demonstrated in products or service purchases of sweets, gloves, red convertible sport cars, and so on and so forth. Eroticism, that feeling of heightened supremacy, that is demonstrated by this. Moral purity or cleanliness, this is demonstrated by the purchase of soap, the purchase of cotton fabric, the purchase of household cleaning chemicals, and oatmeals, and all of them demonstrate the consumption motive of moral purity or cleansing. Why do people eat oatmeal? To cleanse themselves, to demonstrate that they are not eating satanic foods, foods which are high on calories are satanic foods, and so they are not eating that. Oatmeal is a heavenly meal, it is light, it is something that does not give you acid burn reflexes, and so this oatmeal, eating oatmeal is cleansing yourself, cleansing your body, that kind of an idea is there. Social acceptance demonstrated by ice creams, coffees, and toys. Individuality is expressed by gourmet food, foreign cars. Status is explained by the purchase of Scottish whisky, fashionable clothes, luxury cars, that demonstrates status. So, buying a luxury car is actually demonstrating your motive for status, for one over the above, one over the other. Femininity needs in terms of cakes, cookies, dolls, silk, those motives. Reward explained in terms of candy, ice cream, cigarettes, alcohols. These food products, these products actually give you the sense or motivate you to believe the sense of reward, getting something pleasant by doing something good. Mastery over environment, kitchen appliances, power boards, sporting goods, social connectedness in terms of home decoration, morning radio, and lastly the magic mastery in terms of drinking soup when sick. So, several 12 basic consumption motive, why people consume this, and examples of it. There is another interesting theory which was put forward by Jagdish Sheth, and he gives certain motives, certain consumption motives. So, Sheth's consumer motives are 5 in number, and he developed this motive while working for a travel agency, looking at why people buy tickets and how do people like to travel from one place to another. So, he was working for this air company, this travel company, and so he developed these motives. So, it was developed classification scheme to predict consumers' decision in travel. It was developed from this classification scheme of consumer travel. So, what he did was Jagdish Sheth, he isolated 5 dimensions of motivation, each oriented to the achievement of a specific goal. So, 5 dimensions of this motivation, right, and each dimension expresses an achievement of a specific goal. So, one motive, one dimension of motive explains a particular goal, a particular achievement. So, 5 dimensions are functional dimension, which represents utility, the goal, aesthetic or emotional dimensions, which represents appearances, social dimensions, which represents status, situational dimension, which represents benefits, and curiosity dimension, which represents interest. And an example of this is functional motives. The dimension of functional motives, which represents utility, is expressed by the purchase of a car because of its gas mileage, reliability, roominess and safety. So, if these are the reasons, if you are buying a car because of its gas mileage or reliability or safety, you are demonstrating the functional motive. Aesthetic and emotional motive is expressed by the purchase of a car because of its style, color, shape. So, if you are buying a car for its style, for the shape that it has, for the color that it has, for the design that it has, what is motivating you to buy the car? The reason behind your motivation, the dimension of motivation is basically emotional. Social, represented by purchase of a car because it has an image reflecting a reference group. You buy a car because friends of yours have that particular car, or all professors have that particular car, and so you are buying it. That represents the social motive, the motivation, the consumption motivation of social dimensions into here, to be oneness with others, and that kind of a motive is here. Situational motive, and so this is purchase of a car because it was heavily discounted. You bought a car because it was a sale, it was a festival sale going on, and so it gave you huge discounts to buy the product, and so when you buy that, because of that, the motive, primary motive in action is the situational motive. And lastly is the curiosity motive, which is expressed by if the car is purchased because it has a new experience. So, through the purchase of car and the reasons behind that, we can explain the same purchase in terms of 5 different dimensional motives of Jagdish Sheth. That is what he says. He says that the same car purchase, the reason behind the buying will express what motives is being demonstrated in buying the car. So, how consumer motivation affects marketplace behavior? So, as we look at, consumer needs are functional in nature, aesthetic in nature, or emotional in nature, social in nature, situational in nature, and curiosity in nature, and these needs to selection of a generic category. So, the first thing that happens when you have a need arousal and a motivation to fulfill that need, to lower that need, you start by selecting a generic category of product, and then finally making a model of choice. For example, if the need is moving from one place to another, you are planning a holiday and you want to lower this need. So, the first step that you do is selecting a generic category. For example, the state of boredom that you are feeling at house, how should you manage that? How should you tackle that? And there are 2 ways to do it, either stay at home or travel. And so, staying at home is one motive, travel is another motive. So, selecting a generic category is deciding to travel, and then making a choice, model of choice. So, if travel it is what you are looking at, a model of choice will be how you would like to travel. Would you like to travel by air, or would you like to travel by train, or you would like to travel by bus? So, model of choice. So, travel is what you want. I have selected a generic category. Travel is what I want to do to lessen the boredom rather than sitting in home and partying. So, next step in consumer decision making, what motivation, how it works is choosing a model. So, I choose air and then making a specific choice. So, 3 steps are there, how consumer motivation affects consumer marketplace behavior. And the third is making a specific choice. Now, I have decided to travel and I have decided to travel by air, then I decide which air should I be taking. Should I be taking Indigo because it is offering me less fare, or should I be taking Air India which is offering me food, complimentary food, but no less fare, or should I be taking Vistara which is a status symbol, or so on and so forth. So, what mode of air I am making a choice, a particular category, making a specific choice is what is the third. So, decision making process starts by selecting a generic category. First of all, this consumer need has to be addressed by one of the motivations. So, it could be functional motive, it could be an aesthetic motive, situational motive, social or curiosity, or whatever the reason. And so, starting with this, understanding this, it starts with identifying the motivation or how to lower the desire, or to how to lower the need. The need reduction starts with focusing on whether you want to stay at home or you want to travel. So, if you want to travel, you select a generic category of travel, and then you make a model choice of how do you want to travel, because you do not want to stay at home for reducing this boredom, which is the need at present. And so, what you do then is decide a particular specific choice, which is which airline you are taking. Now, influences of consumer conflict resolution. Motivations a number of times into the marketplace can lead to a large number of conflicts. Now, there are some kind of motivation which actually lead the consumer getting into conflicts, and so this conflicts or conflict resolution is another thing that has to be explained, or how motivation creates this conflict and how it is reduced. So, there are three types of conflicts into the marketplace or any motivation can lead to three types of conflicts. In an approach conflict, the individual faces a dilemma of choosing between and among alternatives or approaches that seem equally or attractive. So, two things, you have a coffee and a cookie, a muffin, both are approachable, you want to buy both, but then you do not have enough money to buy both. So, approach motive, or to take a travel towards a certain place and also to save money. So, approach motive, if you take a travel, money will go, so you want to save money as well and take a travel, this is approach conflict. So, what should you do? And the conflict resolution could be in terms of taking one of them. And so, how does the marketer lowers this motive? By demonstrating one approach or one product or one service or product that you are looking forward for, you are approaching to more desirable. So, you can say that travel is easy, travel is of no cost, and so you can save money while traveling, that way he can reduce this motivation or this type of conflict. So, approach conflicts happens when two desirable things are there in front of you and you want both of them. So, how do you choose between them? What can the marketer do here? He can make one of the he can provide information in such a way that one of the choice becomes more appealing over the other choice and the decision becomes easy. So, two things which you want and both are appealing is approach conflict. The second type of conflict is approach avoidance conflict. The same goal has both positive and negative characteristics. You want to travel, but that will take away your savings. So, should you travel or should you not? This cases what the conflict resolution could be, the marketer can provide you enough evidence or enough reasons of why you should travel and how this is not going to harm your expenses. In the first case, if two things are approachable, if two things that you like are within your reach, how do you make a choice? Marketer can lead to, or product manufacturers can lead to more information, more appealing information, more benefits, more coupons on one of the product, and that way you choose one and avoid the other. In an approach avoidance conflict, when the same motive, when the same buying decision, when the same goal has both positive and negative consequences. For example, if you travel, it will initiate money or it will take money, but then what will happen is your savings will go down, and in these cases what the manufacturer can do or what the product service person can do, the marketer can do is he can give you enough reasons of why you should travel and how traveling is not going to take a lot of toll onto your funding or your financial situation. And then there is something called the avoidance or avoidance conflicts, invokes choosing between two undesirable alternatives. You want to get new tires for your car, but they are very expensive. So, expense is one thing and you do not want to buy new tires of car, but if you do not get new tires for your car, maybe in the rainy season you will slip, the car will slide more. So, two motivations where you are avoiding, you want to avoid both of them. So, you do not want to get into a problem, neither you want to spend money. What the manufacturer can do here, what the marketer can do here, provide enough information so that the consumer makes this choice of buying. So, he could put an ad saying that of course you are putting more money, but this more money goes to safety, and so safety first kind of a thing. So, an ad where his product is advertised in such a way that the consumer does not avoid him in the goal, right. So, both are negative decisions, both are avoidance decisions, the goal is avoided in both the ways, two avoidance goals. You do not want to spend money in buying a car tire, but then if you do not buy, you will get through a skid, you will get through an accident, and so to lower this avoidance or to make you favor a particular brand purchase, the manufacturers can put an ad which shows or which confirms the buyer that if you do not do this, then safety is more important than money, kind of a ad. So, influence on consumption patterns. Motives, one activated shape resulting behavior. So, once you have a particular motive, this shapes how you consume a particular product, and so product consumption is a lot dependent on motivation or the drive. Motives for getting started include, so if let us take the example of bungee jumping. So, the consumption process of bungee jumping. Why do most people do bungee jumping or gliding or deep sea diving? To attain thrills. What is the motivation behind it? It is risky, people should not do it. So, this consumption pattern, how is motivation, what kind of motivations are there which make people do this kind of a thing. So, what is the influence of motivation on consumption patterns? Basically, motives for getting started into these kind of acts, they include curiosity, thrill seeking, social compliance and the desire for adventure. Why you should do this? You should do one of these, for example, gliding or deep sea diving. You do that because the motive behind is curiosity, thrill seeking, social compliance, because other people are doing it. You are curious to know what is going on inside, see a new world altogether. You want the thrill to do it and the desire for adventure, and that is the reason why you are doing it. Once you get into that, once you think about or once you are confirmed that you are doing this act, the motives for sticking with, once you start this act, the motive for sticking with the activity include efficacy. You do not want to show yourself as someone who is not efficient enough. The efficacy, the self growth, the idea that I can do it, kind of a thing, that idea of self esteem, that is the reason why you stick to it. The creation of a new self identity, group camaraderie and heightened experience, you want to stick with it. Once started into one of these motives of, let us say, deep sea diving, you started because you are curious, but you stick with it because you do not want to say that you are a runner, or that idea of self identity, the idea of group camaraderie and so on and so forth makes you stick with it. And so, as you in the consumption pattern itself, in consumption of a product, through one stage to another, the motives keeps on changing, and that is what we want to highlight here. And then motives for increased involvement, or why you want to do it again, go through the actual experience, is because of flow, a need for intense experience with thrill and excitement. You stick with it and you go through it again and again is because of the motive of flow, which is a need for intense experience with thrill and excitement. Or communitas, which is a need for sense of community, because you want to be with that community, or a fatigue community, a need for a special means of communication and language that helps the bonding process and that excludes those who do not share that experience. So, that in group out group kind of a thing, that within group cohesion, that being a part of the group, being a part of an elite group is the reason why you stick with it and you do it again and again. And so, as what we explained here is that how does this motivation actually take forward, how this motivation actually moves forward, and how motivation influences consumption patterns. So, how do marketers trigger consumer motives? What is the way in which marketers actually trigger consumer motives? How do they start consumer motives, or start basically start the process of consumer motivation? Inducing need recognition. What the marketer can do is start a new need recognition. For example, when iPads came in, nobody wanted it, but Apple started this need recognition, this idea that you need an iPad. It is neither a laptop nor a phone, in between kind of a thing. It helps you do this, it helps you do that. A need, artificial need was created and a motivation for it was created, and so that is what new products, or when people come up with new things, a new need is created, although nobody needed it and nobody needs it. The phablet market or tablet market is not very good, it did not catch up, so one of the failed products, but then a need was created and so people bought it at times, right. And so one of the ways in which marketers can trigger consumer motive is by need recognition. Triggering motivation through need benefit segmentation. The same product can be advertised differently. For example, the same car can be advertised for old people. So, BMW advertises the same car to a different segment, expressing a different need. So, old people buy BMW because it is a classic car, it gives you status, but for young people the same BMW car is offering you wildness, is offering you enthusiasm, is offering you the sense of thrill, is expressing, is delivering you that gratification of adventure. That is the reason why you are buying it, and so the same car is expressing this thing. And lastly, you can trigger subconscious motivation. So, subconscious motivation is sometimes triggered by manufacturers, for example, hidden motivations or things which are not at the surface, that is triggered by consumers, things like buying jewelries, subconscious motivations, for example, the need for expressing a thrill through jewelry, that kind of thing is expressed or it is initiated by the consumers. So, what we did in this particular lecture is we looked at an important aspect of psychology, which is consumer motivation, consumer emotion, which we will do in the next lecture, emotion, mood and involvement. So, we looked at primarily at motivation, and we described motivation as a desire or drive which makes you do certain acts to achieve a certain goal, and that is what motivation is all about. So, we looked at what is consumer motivation, we defined it, what motivation is, and we looked at the models which are out there. So, be it Maslow's model, be it Dichter's model, or be it Jagdish Sheth's model, which explain how consumer motivation is expressed into the marketplace. Further to it, we looked at how does consumer motivation shapes consumer decision process and post purchase evaluations in the marketplace, and further to it, we also looked at how this consumer motivations are triggered or are set on by the marketer. What does the marketer do to start these consumer motivations? In the next lecture in this series, we look into the idea of emotion and mood, and how emotion and mood play a role in consumer behavior, in consumer decision process, in consumer action into the marketplace. So, for now it is thank you from here.